program. Without further ado, let's invite to join us virtually on the program this morning, Seun Oni, the ever-mercurial and objective reviewer as it concerns the issues in the news. Hello, Seun, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Brian, good to see you. Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks for asking. It's always a pleasure. Let's get straight into the discourse, and this is a very controversial issue, especially with the optimism greeted by the quest to reduce Nigeria's inflation to 15% in the year 2025, noting that it is well above twice that figure, well above 34%, and for food inflation, well above 40%. This morning, making headlines on one of the papers, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, continues to express optimism that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's policies will bring down inflation, stabilize the economy, and also reduce poverty. But the challenge here is not in being optimistic. The challenge is in the timeline in which these promises are made. I don't know if you share in this optimism, or do you think that this timeline is quite short with the projections on our economy as outlined by the minister?
Great question there, Brian. But just to tell you that I'm not that optimistic. It's quite an ambitious plan. But when it comes to economics, you don't just band figures around. Figures are built on fundamentals. That is actually why economics is built on stochastic elements, figures, data, and usually this data is usually over trend. We follow trend for a number of time. First quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, things like annual, biannual, and things like that. So in economics, we don't just build assumptions on the air. We build assumptions on data. We build assumptions on valid figures. In this instance, I think the respected Wale Edun actually is a bit too optimistic. I saw that during the budget presentation. How on earth will the country, based on the fundamentals we have now, we don't yet have full control on our exchange rate. We don't have full control on our production. We don't have full control on the X part of our international trading equation, that is the export and the import mix. We can control a bit of our import, but we really can't control our export because we are not self-sufficient as a nation in a number of the things we even consume here, let alone talking about exporting in order to gain extra dollars. So if you are now projecting a crash of your exchange rate by more than 50% within a calendar year, that's unnecessarily too ambitious. And I was glad when institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, brought out their own projection for the year. You could see our growth rate was a bit moderated, in the region of 3% thereabout. Our inflation rate also, we were told our inflation rate is going to drop, but not as drastic as the Minister of Information had actually highlighted, from over 30% to just 15% in 12 calendar months. I think that's going to be the miracle of the century if it does happen.
Well, we all saw the budget defense and talking about appearing before the Committee on Finance of the Senate to defend the budget. Mr. Wale Edun spoke so glowingly about his principal, the president, and one would see reasons why. But the challenge here is in keeping things in perspectives. Now, whilst we're all hopeful that the vision of $1 trillion economy is achievable, one of the pointers to some of the megacities in Nigeria that are capable of generating such income is Lagos. This morning, there are talks from one of Governor Seun Oni's aides that the state recorded way over $71 million from the December spendings in Lagos. I don't know what you make of that news, and is that replicable across board, or is it just the likes of Lagos and Abuja that are able to show up such revenue?
I would not say it's only Lagos that can generate that type of revenue. It's just that what we have seen over the last 1 decade is that Lagos consistently had prioritized data collection, has prioritized building institutions rather than just depending on the body language of the chief executive, in this instance, which is the governor. Lagos has also shown that with continuity in government, a whole lot can be done differently. But let me also draw your minds back to ADBN was actually there because I saw your icon while the Minister of FCT was speaking to the development in the FCT. And he was very clear that if most of the people who are owing ground rent in the FCT, if they pay up, the FCT could actually get like 100 times what they got from ground rent. He said they got about 30 billion, and if people who are owing, if they pay, they could actually wrap it up to as high as 300 billion. That tells you the potentials in the FCT. And I can say the same, without any equivocation, that across the entire 36 states, we can also see that type of ramping up of revenue in just a single calendar year. So what is usually called the dirty December, of course you know, and everyone will agree that it's not just peculiar to Lagos. It happens in virtually most of the states, except maybe a few states that are going through a whole lot of insecurity issues. But you also know that even the Southeast, that was bogged down and bedeviled by major security issues, usually have a lot of people trooping in for December across that part of the country. So the chief executives of this state, I mean the governors and their state executive team, must just go back. I would suggest some of the things like foundations like Mo Ibrahim Foundation have done across the continent of Africa, where nations will do a peer review. You go and understudy best practices in Lagos. I think every governor should be humble enough to do that across the country. Go to Lagos, learn how over the years they've consistently built institutions that have helped them to be able to aggregate data. Aren't you surprised that while Lagos is saying we raised XYZ amount during 30 December, how many other states have come out to tell you how much they made? None. So that tells you they are doing something that other states are not doing. And so if you want to hit a $1 trillion
dollar economy,
all right, all the, like I've always advocated, the subset, which are the states, must also tour the part of the federal government. On a monthly basis, we see the federal government through the National Bureau of Statistics roll out vital statistics. Can we also begin to see the federating unit, the state, on a monthly basis begin to also roll out vital statistics? We want to know the growth rate in each of the states, the subset. We want to know the employment data across the state. If they can't do it on a monthly basis, maybe they can do it half yearly, that is twice a year. All the states of the federation should also churn out vital statistics. Let's know the level of unemployment in the state. Let's know the level of inflation in the sub-state. And I think that's the way to get it right. Like I always say, we practice a federalism. It means that the federal government is on one side, the 36 states and the local government, the 774 local government, are also on one side. If we are focusing on the federal government, which of course, if you are looking at the net GDP, constitutes about 48% of the total resources in the country, and the states and the local government made up about 52% of the resources in the country, are not doing the same thing. Even if we score 48 over 100, that's still an average mark.
I really appreciate your charge on the National Bureau of Statistics to be able to carry out this half-yearly data projections for Nigerians to be able to gauge our growth. Now, whilst these discussions are gaining momentum, a lot of persons say we are in the danger of a wrong GDP calculation should the policy that is advocating for the inclusion of the underground economy into our GDP ratings. And talking underground economy, we hear that Nigeria is looking to toe the path of the EU and begin to make its GDP projections based on illegal transactions like gambling, prostitution, kidnapping, all of which would also constitute to how much GDP the country is gauged to be producing in a calendar year. Do you think that throwing this part would be one of the wrong ways in looking to achieve our $1 trillion economy?
I don't think so. I think we are allowing our moral compass to shape economic realities. And no nation that is serious does that. When we begin to talk about dirty money, it is still money, all right? If we are making our projections, let me put, for instance, the gambling subsector, which has become a huge sector of the economy. The amount of transaction that goes there, and by the way, it is now largely digitized. That means it's so easy to count economic activities going on across that sector. So we must not allow our moral compass. Right?
I tend to agree with you in some ways, but I tend to also disagree in other ways. Why so is because for the gambling, especially the one that has been licensed by betting shops across the country, which most of the youths patronize in huge masses and numbers, is undeniable. But the challenge there with the likes of prostitution is that people say if you certify that type of dirty money, then we probably have a lot of younger people leaning towards legalizing that as a more professional way to go about earning their living. Not to condemn one of the oldest professions, but we're saying that we're trying to build a society on morals and values to ensure that our culture is not degraded over the years. I don't know what this conversation would hold in terms of your opinions, especially in a world where it's becoming even more difficult to say we have two genders, much like President Donald Trump had said in his inaugural speech. This underground economy or shadow economy, which a lot of dirty money tendencies, like you said, do you think that Nigeria, throwing this part, might be encouraging the next generation to kind of, tune down on its morals in view of what dirty money might be?
I think that is neither here nor there. I'm saying that because why we want to categorize certain sin as bigger sins, we look the other way because from time, there are many advocates who had also suggested that tobacco should be banned, alcohol should not be captured. We have a part of this country that gleefully, monthly share in the VAT that comes from alcohol. But they tell you openly that they ban it, but they don't ban the money that comes from it. It's the same thing I'm saying. We often confuse morality with economic expediencies. These economists, what are they spending there? Are they using calories or exchanging money for values? The value might be negative. That's a different ballgame entirely, and that's the moral side. But somebody is prostituting, she's exchanging, or he exchanging value for money. Somebody is gambling, he wanted something and is exchanging it for another thing. It's the same with someone who walks to the pub and drinks and pays for the alcohol. It's the same for someone who walks to the cigarette store, purchases a pack of tobacco and exchanges for cash. In my opinion, there is nothing different. It's economic transaction. We might now bring, by the way, I'm a Christian, but when it comes to economics, you must realize you are exchanging money for value, whether it's positive or negative. And it is this type of morality that has actually made us not to capture those things in, if we are calculating, aggregating our economic activities in a year, there is no reason why those economic transactions are not captured. That way, if you do a few things for us, in my opinion, the first thing it will do for us is that even if we want to launch a campaign, because as it is today, why some are saying betting, like I follow South Africa a few weeks ago, a few months ago. There is a much more intense campaign on gambling in that country. Why do you think they're able to do that? They have data to know that it's rising, right? They notice that within a space of 3 years, gambling has risen for as high as about 30 to 35% of their youthful population. So it helped them to launch a campaign to encourage their youth to embrace other means of endeavors rather than gambling. The same way, there was a period, Italy, that is known to be a beehive of activities when it comes to prostitution. It just occurred to them that they are having a large chunk of their female population engage in prostitution. So that helped them because there is a data. But today we don't have that in the country because of our fixation with morality above very factual exigencies. We must toil a different path because, like I always say, the moment you can't eat your cake and have it. The moment you are so fixated on morality, what you have is that you're going to have a society that is living in denial and hypocrisy. And that's what we are seeing in this country.
You look to have raised a lot of salient points there, and one of the points you raised that asks the question of our commitment is the lack of data. This morning also reported on the front page of the dailies is the federal government's drive towards including ICT in our GDP contributions for the next 3 years. I don't know if that is feasible. Why I say so is because at the moment we talk about tech bros, tech sis, but it almost feels as though these persons are looking to thrive independently. They continue to complain that there has been no platform created by government to be able to harmonize and encourage the youths who are in ICT. And even when you look at the ICT compliance in certain institutions of learning, especially at the secondary level, there is a wide gap that needs to be filled. How committed do you think the federal government is towards its targeted 21% of ICT contribution to our GDP over the next 3 years?
I think the right way to frame it is that they are expanding, adding more. Because as it were, the last quarter figure from the National Bureau of Statistics actually showed that the fintech and ICT component actually contributed the highest, all right, grew the highest. So that's why I think they are trying to see how they can, I really readily don't have the figure of hand, but I know that that subsector contributed the highest in the last quarter to our GDP. So what they are doing is that they've seen a whole lot of loopholes. They've also seen other potentials that have not been fully harnessed. So that's why they are wrapping up the figure to 21%.
I have that statistics for you now. The one on the fintech's contribution. It says fintech transactions drive FG's revenue to 31.2 billion naira in December.
Yeah, so it's a very huge part of the sector. But I must admit that the background that you gave us, they needed a whole lot of support from the federal government and the other components, the other tiers of government, so that they can maximize. Nations like India had actually been able to make that sector, the ICT sector, as the highest revenue contributor to the nation's GDP. Nations like Singapore, nations like Taiwan, nations like China, South Korea have been able to maximize and do a lot for themselves and for their population. The beauty of the ICT sector is that you can generate what we call a highly elastic employment. A highly elastic employment. It means that, Brian, for instance, you can leave your shift and you are still doing an ICT job. And if it is captured, you'll be captured that you are contributing as a journalist to the economy. You're also contributing during your off time as an ICT person. So the number of jobs that can be created there, this level of unemployment that has bedeviled our country, we can reduce it drastically if we actually focus attention on that sector of our economy. and it can be done very early. I think it's also one subsector where the bar of entry is so low. Okay, the bar of entry is so low. A few days ago, we were having a very funny conversation at home. My boy, who will be 10 this year, started learning coding. And because of his age, I bought a gadget, but I did not say he's the owner. I said I owned it, all right? So he takes permission to use it. And instead of using I usually use that one. So not to give him this false idea that he belongs to him. So he does his job using the same gadget. I do my own using the same gadget. And sometimes my wife also comes and he uses the same. So the bar of entry is so low that is one person or three people can share one phone and they are employed doing different things, doing different ICT jobs. Hope you get that now.
I get it.
Is it ICT you can do that? You can't do that. I don't know of any other sector where you can readily do that kind of a thing. So it means when you teach children in secondary school some ICT skills, soft skills, they can get back home, and even if they don't own a phone, they can have an elder brother who owns a phone, and they will be employed doing some things at a very low age. And so there are so many advantages. And if we are saying we want to do things differently, and we want that percentage contribution to our GDP going forward in the next 3 years, then we must also think inward. This idea of teaching computer on the whiteboard, and in some very ridiculous cases on the blackboard using chalk to draw computer and say this is mouse, this is we have to change it. We must begin to drive our classrooms using tech, and we have a generation that easily grab this reality compared to the generations before us.
Well, before we rest this subject in the news, let's also talk about it from the angle of the digital economy we hoped for. If I cast your mind back to when we had conversations on the e-naira, I don't know where we are on that, because people think that it is pertinent, if you want to domesticate the digital economy in your country, to have some form of store of value for what that digital economy will be driven on, and a means for exchange that can be calculated. This is in line with the federal government's non-acceptance for cryptocurrency transactions. It almost feels as though our legislative arm of government is silent on even coming up with a law that governs the space or even allows for transactions in the space to be somewhat legitimized. I don't know if it's off the back of some cases that they had with foreign companies in Nigeria that were alleged to have sponsored terrorism or had some shady dealings within the crypto space. I don't know what you make of this policy direction of the government when it comes to digital economy. Are we jettisoning the e-naira? Do we have a law on legitimizing cryptocurrency transactions?
Like you rightly pointed out, we don't have a law, but also to let you know that the challenge we are confronted with as a nation is not peculiar to us as a country. Even the United States, just a few days ago, had a major bug with his treasury at the back end. This is sometimes that the stock exchange there will still have glitches. So it's a global issue. And the last statement I made when you asked the last question about digital economy was that the new generation we have are actually years ahead of our parents in terms of their appreciation and ability to grab technology. And that will inform you why a president like Trump, who was sworn in yesterday at 78, would go for a vice president, J.D. Vance, who is just 40. You want to tap into that pool of, what will I say, gravitation to the digital age. Vance is closer to the digital age compared to Trump, who is 78. But in the corridors of power here, when you have the age bracket in the Senate, you are talking about an average of 60 plus. The House of Rep that has fairly younger generation is just a little better than that. So when you bring any legislation that has to do with technology, there is also this unvoiced fear. It's usually very subtle. No, what if they hack our treasury? What if they, and when you hear the debate on the floor, you will know those debates are not based on any fact. They are not based on forward-thinking policies. Most times they are a result of very myopic and sometimes very traditional, cautious steps. And so that's why you need younger people to man some of these places. And the federal government must also begin to think differently to ensure that younger people sit at the table. Because some of these fears can be better addressed when you have younger people who can tell them, you mentioned the e-naira, for instance. What actually happened? It was launched with a lot of fanfare. Many people, like myself, I rushed there. I bought a few e-naira when it was launched. But a few days later, there was a glitch on the CBN side, and it was difficult to transact using the e-naira. And what they just did after just easing that, they were a bit silent. Sometimes there were inquiries, when are we going to see our e-naira back again? And what we were just told is that they are working and they want to come back bigger and better. And so it just shows you the digital world itself is a fast evolving one. And if you are not careful, if you have a generation that can't keep pace with how fast, how fluid things are evolving in that space, they'll just be left behind, trying to provide solution to things that the solution is actually everywhere. You just need to copy best practices and ensure that you are not left behind. There are fears whether they'll be used to sponsor terrorism and the rest of them. But again, that's why nations usually have social security, so that eventually you always hear the United States is catching up with people in certain countries who try to use crypto and the rest of them to commit fraud, whether it's economic fraud, terrorism financing fraud, or mention it. It's just a matter of time. They will do an audit trail. And no, they might not be able to pinpoint who exactly has done it, but they will tell you which country, which company. And that tells you how advanced financial audit has also gone. So we must just wake up. One of my colleagues was telling me it's been a few weeks now, that is it not surprising that our Minister of Finance is old school. Our Minister of Budget is old school. And you'll be dealing with new school fraud and new school digital evolving. So that means they will have to hire several technical aides who are much younger, who can keep pace with this reality. And in the long run, it's the nation that will be dragged back by this type of thing. So we must have a mix of the elderly due to their exposure, their experience, and sometimes their expertise. And you must also have the young sitting at the table due to their digital and innovative ideas and skill set.
Very well said there, Mr. Seun Oni. In moving on, and in fairness to our legislative arm, one of the responses they gave to the Minister of Finance yesterday is that we can't claim to have a healthy economy that does not reflect on the life of an average Nigerian. And quite surprisingly, that story was juxtaposed with a headline on The Guardian this morning talking about the federal government's free cesarean section policy for expectant mothers. We hear that that project is in its first phase, and over 2,000 patients have been registered at 104 facilities. What do you make of this development?
A great one. When I saw it, when it was announced, I was glad that we are a bit thoughtful because the economy, like you rightly said, is not smiling. And the people who are most involved, who bear the brunt of the whole economic issue, are actually people who are the lower ladder of the economy. Cost of medication has spiraled, and the least the government can do is to ensure that people who have critical cases like this. But my fear is that I really don't know how many people can be captured in that type of a thing. We are talking about a population of over 200 million, and we are talking about 2,000 people registered. That's a drop. There are many people who have that issue. And secondly, there have also been people complaining that how well equipped are the government facilities, because we saw what happened a few days ago, the very tragic incidents that took place in Niger State, where tens of people were burnt, and some who had a major degree of burns, they were taken to government facilities, secondary facilities in Suleja. And when the federal government delegation led by the Minister of Information and the Humanitarian Affairs Ministry got them, they were shocked at the type of treatment those people were having. They had to direct that they be evacuated to tertiary institutions. So that would be another thing. How equipped are the government facilities to handle these cases? I think these are the things that will determine if we are going to give a clap, or we are not clapping for the federal government too early until we begin to see real deliveries. And like I said, that number is too few. More people should be brought on board to ensure that people who cannot afford medical treatment, like operations, don't die in a nation that is blessed with these resources that we have as a nation.
Well, I'm hopeful that we can continue to keep our eyes on this, and for our colleagues in the field can also keep us updated on the coverage level in terms of the free cesarean section. But still, with the budget defense, another ministry that was grilled was the Ministry of Solid Minerals. With their budget defense deferred, the National Assembly queried the ministry's resolve to diversify Nigeria's economy, particularly from the angle of mining licenses. We hear that over 7,000 mining licenses have been issued by the NMCO, but there are less than 1,000 active mines. I don't know what you make of the Ministry of Solid Minerals under Dr. Dele Alake, and these issues with the budget being deferred at this time where we need to see budget defense gaining momentum and be able to query the dotted lines and read in between the lines as well.
Thank you. Permit me, I might be a bit hard on my big brother, Dele Alake. He was part of the ministers that I've labeled on a few fora as press statement ministers. He's always in the news, issuing press statements, and we are seeing very little progress in the industry. Don't forget that even that ministry has been unbundled. Now you have a Ministry of Mines and you have a Ministry of Steel Development. You could recollect there used to be a single ministry before now. His Excellency Audu, I don't know his first name, is the Minister of Steel, while Dele Alake is the Minister of Mines Development. He came there, I think, with a whole lot of, he came on overdrive, but not action-based. We couldn't see so much action. I know a few about that ministry because I covered it for a few years as a journalist. And I know that so many things are actually going on in that industry that favor expatriates than Nigerians. There is a whole lot of focus on the wealth that we have underneath the ground in this country. From China, other nations of the world. Of course, you could recollect that the last time the president was on a state visit to France, one of the major things they signed is that France also wanted to partner with the federal government, with Nigeria, to come into that space, our mining space. That tells you that is a darling of the entire nation. But my concern is, how is it so difficult to get credible people who can actually stamp their feet and do great work in that sector? We have gold in Zamfara. instead of becoming a blessing to that part of the country and the nation at large, gold has become a curse to that state because the hike in banditry and terrorism there, in part, have been traced to gold prospecting. And I can say the same thing. States like Ondo State, we've reached deposits of bitumen. All we have heard over the years, successive administration, is that we have the second largest bitumen deposit in the world. Nothing has been done. We can begin to pick state after state like that, where you have this type of things, and it's really not making any difference. Unemployment is highest in some of these states with the highest deposit of resources as this. And so the minister must go back, maybe bring the right team together. Like we have seen in the power sector, the minister came in initially, there were a lot of issues here and there, but gradually it's beginning to, you might see anything you want to say. I think the only major challenge that we are having in that sector now is the grid collapse that just comes in between and put a dent on the very visible and incremental progress we have seen in the past few months. And of course, add to that will be the tariff increase that people had actually screamed blue mother about. But when it comes to electricity, I think generally, the general feeling across the country is that there is now a sense of appreciable progress. We are not where we should be. As a nation, we are still celebrating. Our total capacity is about 13 megawatt, and what we are able to actually pull out is actually about less than 8,000 of the 13,000. What we are able to produce as light for people is less than 8,000. And as a nation, we should be talking about maybe 20,000 and above. So we are not where we should be. But when you compare the light issue, compare with what it used to be some 3 years ago, you will see that there is a measured progress. And so that's the type of thing I think a minister should be judged by, not by the amount of press releases, bringing journalists together, and having a frenzy traveling from one place to the other under the guise of bringing partners into the industry. So the National Assembly, I think they got that right. They must go back and not just speaking grammar, go and articulate measurable, smart goals that will be specific, will be measurable, that will be time bound, and we can now begin to see a better lease of life, because that sector is another sector that can generate a lot of employment in the country and also increase our revenue as a nation.
Very well said then. Still we're sticking with the National Assembly, but tilting towards the Green Chambers. The House of Reps was advocating for more funding for certain MDAs. You'd see some budgets being, presented with defense in its stead, and some of the questions there is this figure on paper actually sufficient to keep these MDAs and parastatals of governments running, especially with optimal performance being asked from them? I don't know what you make of this development.
Sadly, Brian, I think I won't agree to some of those things if you ask me. We all know how things work in this country. When a ministry, for instance, during the budget, the real paperwork shows that maybe let's say 100 billion is allocated to the ministry. We know that actual, what we call actual releases, is usually maybe a fraction of that 100 billion. At the end of the budget year, out of 100 billion, the ministry might get maybe a paltry 40 billion. That's 40% of the. So that's why at the end of all our budget cycle, we have gotten another. I think you also enter the Oxford Dictionary or any of the dictionaries. What we say, budget performance. Okay, we have that very novel term. Apart from, instead of looking for how much we have performed, we now begin to talk about at the end, our budget performed 60%. And so you see successive administration give itself pat on the back that previous administration did 52%, but we're able to do 60%. That's on one side. On the other side, historically, there is a way you can go. And that's not, I must say, it's not peculiar to Nigeria. It happens in every other clime. As a minister, you find a way to lobby the committees who are in charge of going through your budget. So, for instance, if you are the Committee on Navy, the Navy will find a way and lobby members of that committee so that when it comes to the floor, where the Appropriation Committee and other people who are saddled with the responsibility of engaging MDAs in their budget defense, it is this committee that you have lobbied. They will come on your behalf and begin to say, very praiseworthy things about you. Most of the increment, and I followed a number of the budget defense presentation. Most of the increment, for me, you just need to cut down on the recurrent, and you have higher figure on the other side, on the capital budget side. So when you're asking, you are giving 30 billion, for instance, as a man, say, no, we can't do anything with 30 billion. And out of the 30 billion, you are devoting about 26, 24 to overhead and those kind of things. And it is that ministry, you go and look at it, they want to buy cars, want to buy vehicles they bought last year. They want to buy computers. They want to buy. Then when you remove those kind of things, you will have much more money to do better things as a ministry. And for me, that's where the National Assembly must look at things more dispassionately. And that's when they call for the National Assembly budget office must also come loudly, where you can have seasoned technocrats help them look at their books, look at these books, and suggest how to go about their budget defense. I think, my opinion, that's the best thing, rather than just seeing lobbies coming on the floor during defense session. And I saw some of that, I just laughed. I say, this ministry, the money they had in previous years, what have they done with the money that should warrant anybody coming to lobby that they have very, very little money to do what they are doing? So they must account for what they have done with the money they've been getting before now. Look at the recurrent side, needless things that have been imputed there, and we know why they imputed them. It is so that money can change hands, and the level of corruption we have seen in our society is increasing year-on-year basis. So the National Assembly owe us that duty to scrutinize that side and take off the things that are needless. Put it on the other side that they say the money is not enough, and you just see that we might just have a little more, because it's elementary economics that the resources available are usually not limitless, but the needs of human beings are usually limitless. So that's where scale of preference, what we call alternative for gun, comes in, and life goes on that way.
Now, in our final discussion on an issue in the news that has also elicited much reaction is a 50% tariff hike in the telecommunication sector as approved by the Nigerian Communication Commission, NCC, although we hear it will not be implemented up until mid into February. But a lot of persons are now worried that Nigerians may have to pay even higher for phone calls, data, and SMS. People say it's long overdue. It's been 12 years since there was any hike in that sector. But judging the current economic realities, what would have been the best approach to this 50% tariff hike in telecoms?
I think we spoke about this before now.
Yes, we did.
And the increment is as a result of very obvious economic fundamentals. We must all agree that it is actually overdue. The other side will be, when is the right time? If we say next year is not the right time, people will still complain. So the right time is when the government can still take action before we start seeing telecommunication companies closing shop. They will lose job taxes that they should pay to the government will not be able to receive again, and several other things. So I think it's something coming. We all know this. There is going to be a time as this. Whether the 50% increase is the right benchmark is another thing. I think experts in the industry will be able to speak to that. And I was laughing because you used the term we may see increment in our cost of calls and data. It's not me. We'll definitely see. And all Nigerians should get set. You know, the amount you are paying for call before, you might just begin to see 50% increment across board, your data, the voice, and every other aspect of our communication. Like I said, it's a business decision. We all know how things, the amount we bought rice last year is not the amount we're buying rice now, and every other thing. I think it's also the same for those people in that space. It's a business. And so we kind of allow them to run at a loss because the economy is dire. They are also part of the economy. And so I think what the NCC and other regulators should do differently is to ensure that, because there's also what they call the bandwidth, right? So they should ensure that nobody goes outside the bandwidth that has been, the template that has been agreed on. No Nigerian is cheated out of their hard-earned resources. And the rate of drop cost, now that their tariff will be increased, it also means they must also get better, improve on their service delivery. If we are paying more, we should also get more in terms of the quality of service that they give to Nigerians. But whether the tariff should be increased or not, I think it's just reasonable business decision. They are business people. They are not there for charity. At some point, the tariff have to be reviewed, and it has come. So when it starts, the organization start monitoring them to ensure that nothing fraudulent goes on in that space. I think that's where we are as a country. And like people say, water we always find is level.
Well, saying that, especially in line with the clamor from the Nigerian Labour Congress that we need a wage review, I'm very sure many Nigerians will not be bothered with the hikes in tariffs across different service sectors. But the challenge is with the purchasing power parity that continues to dwindle in the country. In line with this hike here, hike there, do you think that there should be talks for this wage review to be a minimum of 2 years or even less to accommodate the inflation trajectory growth and these tariff hikes?
Sadly, maybe the the Labour Congress did not see this coming. Some of us saw it coming. Every time you have this cycle of wage review, what it does also is that prices will go up. I know the price review we had then was based on, from what they said, the federal government had denied severally. We should start with possibly this NLC fixation on having wage negotiation on a central basis. I think there's a fixation on that, but the realities are not the same. To get a one-bedroom apartment in the FCT, on the average now, you need ₦1 million. In my Ekiti, with that ₦1 million, you get a land and you can start building. Hope you get that now. For instance, I will get my family land, maybe buy some cola. We don't take cola in my place. You buy palm wine, some fine drinks for elders, and you add a little amount of money, maybe a few hundreds of thousands, and they'll give you land and you can start building. It's also similar in a number of states. But when you say somebody who is looking for an average of 500 to 1 million for accommodation, to get the same salary as someone who perhaps is not burdened with that economic reality, I think something is not right. Okay, that's where we actually got it wrong, and we must start thinking differently. I'm just throwing this on the table for all of us to consider. The economic reality today, I'm one of the people who strongly believe that 80,000 is nothing for any worker. Sometimes I wonder how they survive it, how they survive 80,000 minimum wage. And so when you now bear in mind that even those who are on the higher level, just a little adjustment here and there, and eventually the difference between someone who is starting work today and somebody who is on maybe level 13, maybe 35,000 difference. And so you ask yourself, with 130,000, what would that kind of person do? Who stays in Abuja, who stays in Port Harcourt, maybe Lagos, and some other cosmopolitan parts of the nation? Compare with somebody who lives in, I love using my state because at least I know I'm aware of the realities there a bit, where things are not that very expensive. You can get some things, maybe because you have land to farm and do some other things by the side. These are the realities. And so, do we need salary review? It just took place a few months ago. No government will accede to that type of a thing. No government will accede to that. What we need to do differently is that we also begin to widen economic opportunities for people who are jobless, who are dependent. Because when people are jobless, what that means is that they'll be depending on some people to survive. So parents who are earning maybe 200,000 and they have 3-4 kids at home who are jobless. It means those 4 children who are now graduate but are jobless will be depending on them. So, but when the economic space is widened, all right, it means these 4 guys will also get their job. The 200,000 their parents are earning will take them, all right, in a will be able to cater for more of their resources that they were giving to their 4 children. And that's how our economy actually runs. Is the aggregation of the micro that now defines the outlook of the macro. And so jobs here and there for virtually most of Nigerians. There are people who might choose not to work, but if we have a whole lot of people who are able and willing to working, and due to an enabling environment by the 3 tiers of government, we'll begin to see more lease of life. And let me address, maybe in closing, I don't know the time I have, this fuel issue is also an issue that actually aggravated a lot of the economic realities we saw. And we have been told that the tendency, all right, to reduce the price in that industry is there if we have more production. And so the NNPC must now focus on reviving the second part of the Port Harcourt refinery, ensure that Kaduna refinery comes on board, and Warri refinery is now working optimally. And also encourage those who have been licensed to run modular refineries. Let's see if state government, federal government can encourage them, give them tax breaks. If they are having issue importing some of the things they require to start up these modular refineries, let's encourage them so that we can now begin. We are not just self-sufficient. NNPC said a few days ago that we are nearing self-sufficiency. But the goal is we get to a place where we have more than enough here and we have enough to sell. That way we make more money and the pressure on our FX will reduce. The band rallying down, reducing price of fuel, we experienced that. And so Nigerians can now put their money in things like food. Let's continue this push. Like this year now, I'm joining people who are going fully into farm, do a lot. Let's encourage more Nigerians to do that. And that way, some of these harsh economic realities will begin to reduce across the nation.
Well, I must thank you, Seun Oni, Editor-in-Chief of Daily Courier, for taking our time to critically analyze these issues making the rounds in the news this morning. We do appreciate you.
Thank you for always having me. Do have a great day ahead of you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.